Hi everyone, it's Tonya Gibbs, and today I want to share with you a watercolor card process video featuring the Stampers Big Brush Artist Pens by Faber-Castell Design Memory Craft. So for today's card technique, I used all of these colors from the Stampers Big Brush Artist Pen. I will link up a blog post down below that has all of the colors listed, as well as links to them where you can purchase them too if you would like to add these to your collection. I'm going to start with a piece of cold press watercolor paper, and this is the actual Tim Holtz brand. I'm going to go ahead and sketch out a rough estimate of where some of the elements will be on my card so that I can have this as a visual reference as I'm drawing the rest of the foliage around. And I'm just kind of sketching it out a little bit. So now I have a piece of recycled packaging, and I'm going to use my markers to scribble onto this packaging, and then I'm going to apply a little bit of water to them. So I'm starting with my darker blue, purple colors first, and that is the purple violet 136 is the dark color at the top, and then the magnesium violet, which is the one that is right under. And all I'm doing is taking a small round paintbrush and stippling those colors onto my card base. And I'm not worried about overall flower foliage shape. All I'm doing is dotting it on. So now I'm going to take a little bit of this light cobalt turquoise and add a little bit to the mix as well. So the blues are going to help to give a little variation in color so that it has some interest in all of the foliage. And so this pinker color is the crimson number 134, and it has like more of a little bit of a pink tone to it. So by adding a little bit from each one of these colors into each one of the flower clusters, I'm going to get a really nice variegated tone of flowers here. And then I'm taking my water brush and I'm just adding tiny bits of water to the pigment off on the left and then transferring it over. If I notice that it's getting a little too wet, then I'm going to move on to another flower petal and come back to it later. You can also, if you notice that you have too much water pooling up, you can always dab it with a little baby wipe or paper towel. And I'm trying to stick all of the darker colors towards the bottom, so if there's an overlap in the foliage, the bottom layers are going to have the darker colors, and that just helps to provide some shadows and depth of field. And I'm trying to also stick with not keeping two colors identical to each other side by side. So here you can see I have filled in most of the card now, and it's time to come back in and add a few more details. And all I'm going to do is pick up again just a few pieces of the color, and some of the areas my brush is really wet, so it dilutes it down and makes it a paler consistency. And then in some areas I'm going with the straight up color with very little moisture on my paintbrush, and then I'm going to get an even darker tone. But I'm just basically putting little teeny tiny dots all over the area where the foliage is going to be. Periodically you will notice that I'm going in with the marker and stippling as well. That is going to give me an even harder round dot. So the other areas that are more muddled and blended from the water are going to serve as sort of like a background. Like if you were looking at something through a lens, you would notice that the things in the foreground are really sharp and have really crisp edges, and then things that are further away are more blurred out. So that really gives you a really nice depth of field and adds some dimension to our flower cluster here. So now it's time to work on my flowers, or my leaves. I am going to use the chromium green and the May green. The May green is the lighter of the tone, and I don't recommend using this flat brush to do this. I think I would prefer to stick with the round brush, but I'm trying my hand at it. And of course I'm adding a little bit too much moisture here, so you'll notice that I'm putting it only on one side, and then I'm going to allow this to dry for just a minute before I start moving the color around. And you'll even notice that I'm picking up some of that pigment with a paper towel just to help it along. I really want this to stay somewhat soft, and then I can come back and add the darker shadows later after the pigment is put down on all of the leaves. So that's what you're seeing me do now, is just adding a little bit darker color to the edge. And again, if you want the darker tones from the markers, then just use less water. Now, generally, Stampers Big Brush Artist pens, when they're put onto a dry surface, will go on like a marker. Like you saw here, I'm getting a really hard, crisp, sharp line when I apply it directly to the painting. But since this watercolor paper does have some moisture on it from where I painted the flowers, I'm able to still come in with a little bit of moisture on my paintbrush and work the pigment around. It hasn't completely dried yet. So this is almost like, if you put water on the surface, it's almost like working with these markers on a prepped surface, even though this watercolor paper was not prepped in the beginning. The water is helping the marker not to set just yet, and giving me the opportunity to play with it and work the pigment around. So I'm really in love with this technique, and I think I'm going to try it on something bigger later on. So as you can see here, I'm just adding a lot of details to these leaves, sharpening up some of those edges, and then if you'll notice, I'm stippling some of that green into my flower area as well, because what that's going to offer is, say, leaves that are nestled behind flower clusters. It just gives that extra tonal range. So now I've taken my cold gray 4, number 233, and I've added a little to my palette there, and only placed it in one side of my bucket, and then I'm wetting my brush and pulling the pigment over to the other side. And then I'm going to come back in with the cold gray 6, number 235, which is the darker toned of the grays, and adding some shadows in under my flowers and around the base to just define the edges a little more and give them a little crispness. So a little bit of gray goes a long way. I did learn that in this little series. And if you'll notice, I'm adding some of that darker color to my flower clusters too, because again, it helps to define the edges of the flower cluster, but it also helps to give you a little bit of depth of field and offer some shadows to some areas. Tiny bits go a long way. Now I'm going to go back in and stipple some of my white into this area. And notice that I'm working from the bucket back up to the flowers. I'm allowing that moisture on the cardstock to dry so that everything doesn't end up being blended together and turn into mud. So again, just taking a paper towel, picking up all of the extra moisture as I need to, and just continuing to work those little stipples everywhere. We seriously have used just a few little brush strokes here. Mostly it has been just little itty bitty dots. And I think it's cool how your eye will automatically assume this is a flower cluster, even though it's just a whole bunch of dots, because of the overall composition of the layout. So it's really cool. And notice here that I've added a little bit of that darker color next to a cluster that has the lighter colors. I'm adding a little bit of pink in some areas, and this again is just going to add a little bit of interest to my flowers. So now I'm going to go ahead and do like a little ribbing on my pot. I originally wanted this to have this rusted tonal look, so I reached for the number 169 big brush pen, which is a brown color. I'm probably going to butcher the name, but it's Caput Mortium. And my pot was just a little too dry, so I got this really harsh line. So then I went back with the dark gray, which is the cold gray 6, 235, and I'm just going to color over it. But then I love how it left this nice rusted tone, undertone around my pot. So now to ground my flower pot and to give it a little bit of area to sit on. I've just taken a combination of the brown and the dark gray there off to the side and a little bit of water to create a plank or a wooden platform for my flower arrangement to sit on. As you can tell, there's a lot of moisture on this card, so I'm going to go back with the light gray, and then I'm going to come back in and add a few more shadows with that darker gray and then blend them out with the wet paintbrush. And if you'll notice in the card, whenever it's dry, you'll start seeing I'm coming down at a point under the flower, so it looks like a shadow being casted onto that wood. Such a cool effect. So now I've decided, well, I really want the platform to be more brown because the pot was really gray. So that's where you see me blending that out there. And then I thought, well, what if it would be cool if this was sitting on the porch, that it had the porch wall. It was, sitting up against the wall. So I've decided to draw in a few brown areas up the wall so that the wall is like a wooden wall, and then I'm going to paint it really dark at first with the brown because it's going to be shadowed by the plant. And the when I did the pole, I thought, I really think I want to carry this all the way up the side of the card as if it were completely next to a pole, not just on the like on a post or something. So I'm just going to continue to build that out. Notice I'm being very careful around where my leaves are not to add too much color. By wetting that panel before I put that brown down, I was able to go ahead and mix the color without it mixing into the cardstock. Keeping everything in a straight line, it keeps with the wood grain look. Now I'm going to come back with some of the dark gray and add that pigment in there as well. So between the combinations of the brown and the grays, I'm getting a really nice tonal effect, and it's really starting to look like a wood panel. So again, just working that in with the paintbrush and keeping it really moist so that I can have the opportunity to work this pigment around. So then I decided to add a little bit of shadow to my barrel to make it look like it is curved a little more. And I'm allowing all of these pigments to sort of dry a little bit before I go back and add more. So I have this tape sped up to 2.5 times as fast as it was created. So it took me approximately about an hour to create this. So now I'm coming back in with my blues. Again, I'm going to stick originally with the light cobalt turquoise, but I've diluted it down with a little bit of water off to the side. I'm being very careful around the foliage of my plants and then pulling the color out with the water. Now I'm going to come back in with the dark gray again and add a few more details there. And I dried this with a heat gun, but then I noticed that at the bottom it just needed to be blended a little better. Now keep in mind that these colors are all going to dry a little bit lighter than what you see when they're wet. So as it's drying, I noticed I might need to add a few more shadows there under my foliage. So I've come back with this is the cobalt green pen number 156, and I've added some of that off to the side, and you'll see it pooling there. I'm allowing it to pool and just set into the cardstock, and then I'm going to pick my paper towel up and pick it up. And look at how awesome the shadows are there around the flowers. You can really see that definition from that darker blue. So then I decided to go back in and add a few yellow dots as if this were the centers of all of my flowers, and the yellow just helped to give it just that another little touch of detail. And then once this all started to dry, I came back in with some of my other darker purple colors to just give a few more highlights and shadows and details there to some of the foliage. So it was a super simple card to put together. I hope you guys try this technique. It was, I recommend starting out with something very simple. And look to the internet for inspiration if you need to, but it's so fun. So once all of it was really good and dry, I grabbed my Aquarilla black watercolor pencil and just drew some harsh lines, and then just tried to blend them a little with my finger to soften them up a little bit. Since it's watercolor, if I get a little carried away, I can always come back with some water and dilute it down again. But I really love how that gives the nice wood grain texture on my my little pot that my flowers are sitting in, as well as the porch floor and wall on the right hand side. And then again, just come back with the green. Now it's time to assemble my card. I have pulled out a piece of basil dark purple cardstock that I have cut to an A2 size, and it's I've trimmed down a piece of white cardstock to put there in the center so you can write a sentiment. And then I'm also going to trim off another piece of cardstock to stick here on top to mat my flower arrangement. I've decided to go ahead and pop dot that up. I wanted to keep this very simple in case the person I give it to would like to frame it. They absolutely could. It would be easy to remove it to add it to a frame if you needed to. Or you could frame it inside the whole card. It'll look really pretty sitting on a tabletop with flowers as well. So just to kind of break up some of all of that brown down at the bottom and to add a little more interest, I've just taken some wheat twine that I'm wrapping around the bottom, and then I'm going to tie it into a bow there. And keeping it, again, extremely simple. I want the focus not to be on the embellishments, but instead on the arrangement that I hand drew. Because you spend all that time hand drawing something, you don't want to pull the attention away. So once I got my bow all tied down here at the bottom, I decided to go ahead and add a sentiment at the top. Again, if someone wanted to leave this out, I didn't want it to just say happy birthday, so I wanted something that was a little more generic for my sentiment. So to add that sentiment to the top of the card, I decided to use my Essential Pit Artist Pen Black 199. This is the small. And I'm going to hand draw Enjoy the Little Moments there at the top. So to keep my letter forms straight, I've just grabbed a T-square ruler and I'm going to lightly place down the little moments. I think when you're going to hand draw something onto a card like this, you need to make sure that all your letter forms are similar in height and size and style. It really makes for a really nice clean hand lettering. And then I decided to do a cursive Enjoy on the top. So here what you see me doing is adding a little bit of weight to the lettering so that it has a little more interest to it as well. And adding a few little curls around the edges and just to give it some interest as well. And I just love how this turned out. The card is just so beautiful. So here's our finished card, and you can really see how the Aquarella black watercolor pencil has added the nice texture for the wood grain. And you can also see how the turquoise has added this really nice crisp shadow under my flower petals, giving that really nice look too. And here's our finished card. So thank you so much for hanging out with me during this process video. I hope I've given you some ideas on how to use your Stampers Big Brush Artist Pens for illustrations. As always, there will be a link to a blog post down below that has links to all the products used today. And make sure that if you do follow along, that you hashtag following Tonya Gibbs in your social media. If you've enjoyed this production, please give me a thumbs up, leave me a comment, and share it with a friend.